you for joining us for our Cool Season Forages Living on a Few Acres program. My name is Tim Wilson, St. Johns County Extension Coordinator and Production Agriculture Agent. And today we're going to cover a program that I think a lot of you guys will be interested in on Cool Season Forages. And my co-speaker tonight is going to be Dr. Wendy Mussolini. She's the Putnam Flagler multi-county agricultural agent, and Dr. Mussolini is going to provide the second half of this presentation. But tonight I'm going to go ahead and go over my portion, and we're going to discuss and share my screen with everyone. Can you see that, Dr. Mussolini?
I can.
All right, excellent. Like I said, thank you all for joining us, and we're going to spend the next 20-30 minutes covering this, and then we'll shift over and let Dr. Mussolini cover her portion towards the end of our program. But again, thank you all for joining us, and I hope that the information you get here today will help you to make some decisions on what type of cool season forages might be good for your operation, if it's the right decision for you, and if so, how you might manage that and ultimately have the most success possible. But again, we're going to talk about this and go through some basic, check my slides here, there we go. We'll go through some basic forage terminology. I think it's important to go back and remember that there are different types of forages that are out there. We have warm season perennials. A lot of y'all might be familiar with this because we talk about Bahia grass and Bermuda grass a lot, especially in North Florida. If you move to different parts of the state, you may hear folks talk about limpo grass, star grass, and some other things. We do see a lot of perennial peanut throughout North Florida, but Bahia and common Bermuda are the most that we see up here. Those are warm season perennials. We do see some warm season annuals such as millet, sorghum sedan. These are some options that folks will dive into depending on how their pasture situations look. They may be looking to replant in the following year and go ahead and try to gain some material through the warm season. What we're going to talk about and focus our efforts on are the cool season annuals, such as Italian ryegrass, the pseudo grains, the clovers. We spend a lot of time talking about ryegrass, triticale, wheat, some of these other varieties that we see that are grown more common in our area. And the last portion of the forage terminology would be grasses and legumes. So it's just kind of a little background on some of the differences that we see with our forages. Things to consider when you're planting. The backbone of our forage management strategy for our livestock operation is going to be our perennial pastures. Again, mostly North Florida, we're going to see Bahia grass and Bermuda grass. There may be some others, but mostly varieties that deal with these two main species of grass. And that's what we expect to grow starting in sometime mid-March, late March, our typical spring green up, that we're going to see forage volume continue to grow as the day length increases, maintain that throughout the summer months, and then start to decrease as the fall and winter months approach. But our perennial pastures, they're our most dependable, they're persistent, they're productive, they're nutritional, and that's what we're going to really try to make sure we don't mess up on and try to maximize on, so that we provide that forage material for our livestock and give them the best opportunity to have the nutrition they need to maintain their body condition, their reproductive status, and so forth. But when we look at that, we're going to look at the soil type, the moisture, and working to manage that. And that's a whole separate presentation. But what we want to do here is whenever our perennial pastures start to decline, and we think about maybe sometime in mid to late October, the beginning of November, we call them cool season forages because we look for cooler temperatures. We do look at day length. We do look at our perennial pastures going into dormancy, and sometimes that can be delayed based on temperature. It may not be that our perennial pastures are continuing to grow and be productive, but they may not necessarily go dormant. So they're still competing against our cool season forages. But what we're going to try to do is provide a forage material that is actively growing, that our livestock species can can graze on and and gain the nutrition they need to do what we want them to do. And so we're going to spend some time looking at that. Now, here's a more of a visual of what I was just talking about. If you look at the top two white boxes, we have Bermuda grass, Bahia grass. Those, again, are productive typically through April through October at some point, maybe a little earlier, maybe a little later. But we're going to try to fill in those gaps from October through March with our cool seasons. Here's another graph that's a great example for our region of the state. If you look at this, it does talk about particularly different species such as rye, wheat, annual ryegrass, and some of the clovers. And when we would see expected to see the maximum production versus when we see it start to fall off. And really trying to make sure we've covered all months of the year with forage material so that we can reduce the amount of time we spend feeding our livestock out of a bag or out of a bunker of some sort. But different things that'll affect what type of forage you choose, be your soil type, the amount of livestock that you're going to put on there, what your nutrition goal is, what you're trying to get out of the deal, and how you want to manage this. In a cool season setting, we're going to spend a lot of time talking about forage management, grazing management strategies, and looking at, we don't want to prepare a section of our property, whether it be 1 acre, 2 acres, 15 acres, put all of our cattle on that property and leave them, or put all of our horses out there and leave them, because they're going to lay on it, they're going to step on it, use a bathroom on it, and basically they're going to wear that pasture out fairly quickly. So we do spend a lot of time talking about grazing strategies. Put them in for an hour, pull them back off. Put them in for an hour, pull them back off. And we always have to remember, especially with our livestock, especially with our cattle, make sure that we look at providing some high mag mineral, because a lot of times in some of our cool season forages, we'll see lower magnesium. Provide that high mag mineral so that their magnesium concentration in their body goes up, so that we can prevent problems such as grass tetany. But going back to the soils on our slide here, the two predominant types of soils in our agricultural region, the main ones would be sandhill soils and flatwood soils. Sandhills are excessively drained, they're droughty, they're poor native fertility. Flatwoods are poorly drained. In comparison, sandhills are excessive. They don't hold the water. Flatwoods do hold the water. They have poor natural fertility, and they're limited nutrient holding capacity. And I know, especially here in St. Johns County, we have some areas that used to be called, for example, we had one called Flatwoods Hunt Club, and now we see a lot of equine operations or smaller units, 3, 6, 5, 10 acres in this particular area. And I try to remind people it was called Flatwoods Hunt Club for a reason. It was flatwoods. And so we do need to go back and make sure that we're managing those soils appropriately. So another soil that we see in different places are muck soils. These are periods that are sometimes submerged, that good to great natural fertility. It's 100% organic. So if you can grow on muck soils, you can really do well, but they can be a little different type of strategy versus our sandhills and flatwoods. We need to evaluate the soil pH. We need to know where we're at so that if we do need to add some lime, if we have a pH that is lower than what our target is, you can add lime. It'll raise that pH up and help your forages to grow. If our pH is above where our target is, we don't want to add anything. We want to try to realize we'd like that pH to be a little bit lower. You can come in with a little bit of sulfur if you chose to reduce that. You have to be willing, you have to determine your willingness to fertilize consistently and appropriately. Certainly whenever we plant cool season forages, 2 weeks, 3 weeks after we plant, we want to put, some nitrogen out there. 4 to 6 weeks later, we want to come back and put some more nitrogen. And we want to make sure that we don't short ourselves in that area. But let's talk about how to take a soil sample, because this can be if I ever come to your farm, or if you ever visit with me about pasture management, this is a tool that I'm going to want to implement on your farm so that we can get that base. We want to know what your pH is. We want to know what nutrients we need to add to your farm. But let's just go through and talk about it briefly. I won't spend a lot of time on this. Some of you guys may have done this before. If you have more questions on it, feel free to reach out to me or one of your local county extension agent, and they'd be happy to visit with you about how to take the sample. But You can get soil sample bags. I have them here in boxes. We don't do boxes anymore from your extension office. Determine what you want to do. If I was taking soil samples from a hay farm, I would try to get samples in 40 acres or less. If I'm at someone's farm that's a smaller operation, less than 40 acres, if everything is similar as far as the way that farm is set up, I may just take one sample. But if I see some areas that are really low and some that are, if there's big differences, then I may take two samples because I want to know how to adjust each of those sections. We want to determine the area we're going to take. Now, we want to avoid our wet spots, our fence rows, our feeding areas, something that's going to change the pH. If the animals are sitting there using a bathroom for a period of time, that would change them. We want to use a soil probe or a shovel to take the samples, and we want to walk your field, drive your field, however you want to do it. I have a soil probe in my office. We take we go about 6 inches deep. We take anywhere from 10 to 15, I say here, at least 15 places in each field. We put that into a bucket and we combine them and we mix them up. The reason we do that is we want to composite. We want a variety of soil from different parts of this pasture mixed up into one mixture, and then I'm going to fill that soil sample bag to a fill line and let it dry. Well, we're going to let it dry first. Then we're going to put in that bag to the fill line. We're going to identify that bag so that we don't get mixed up. And I've had people do this where they go through and they take soil samples and they can't remember which field they called what. So it's good to have your locations identified in a way that you can go back and look at the soil sample and know where you're talking about. Fill out the paperwork. Routine soil sample costs $10 a sample. This is an older slide. It needs to be updated. You can send your sample to the University of Florida Feed Environmental Lab, and we can soil testing lab, and we can get our results back anywhere in just a couple of days up to 2 weeks. Really easy process, doesn't take a long time. But if you're not checking your soil, I love this slide, chances are you're spending more money than you should, not making as much as you could, because feeding cattle or horses can be expensive. I know a lot of times with our equine operations, we don't worry about the nutrition as much from what we're getting from the field, but it's important to recognize there's nutritional value there. We just need to manage that, maybe reduce our feeding costs on our horses. But on cattle, certainly it's easier to raise cattle on pastures versus feeding them out of bags. If you want to try to make money, grazing management is a way to help that happen. Now, here's the soil pH. It can be anywhere from 1 all the way to 14. Our acidic all the way to our alkaline. Our neutral is 7 to 8. Most forages that I work with need a pH of anywhere between 5.5 to 6.5, somewhere in that ballpark. So you can kind of see where we're at on the scale here. Here's another example of where some of these things might fall, these different nutrients might fall based on soil pH, but we're going to go ahead and move forward on this. Just looking at some of the different grasses that we might spend some time working with. Again, I talked a lot about Bermuda grass and Bahia grass. They need a target pH of anywhere between 5.5 to 8. Bermuda grass can go up all the way up to 8. We don't want it to 8, but again, I've worked with some guys that had pH of 8.2, and we knew we were on the cup. We were on the outer edge of where that would be okay. Our Bahia grass, anywhere between 5.5 to 6.5, to give ourselves the best opportunity for the most growth possible. Our warm season annual grass is the millet and sorghum, anywhere between 5.5 to 7, 7.5. But you'll see on our cool season forages, our cool season annuals, our oats, rye, triticale, ryegrass is anywhere between 5 to 7. If I go out there and your pH is 4.3, then they want to add a little bit of lime. If we know we're going to try to put ryegrass and it's 6, and I got a 4.3, will it grow? It may grow, but if you want to get the best production possible, you want to try to increase that pH. Warm season legumes, anywhere between 5.5 to 7 with perennial peanuts. You look at the clovers need everything kind of ranges between 5.5 and 8. We don't see things below 5. We don't see things usually above 8, 8.5. Now, when you look at our sandhill soils, going back to the soils a little bit more, look at native vegetation. We see a lot of sand and longleaf pines on this, a lot of turkey oaks. Soils are a small step removed from sterile ground. Now, if you go through there and you remove pine trees, they like it acidic. So if you remove clear cut an area and you're thinking, gosh, I'm going to put that into grass and we're going to graze our livestock out there this year, we're going to get great production until those trees are gone. That's not necessarily the case. But again, sandhill soils, they drain really quickly. So established forages should be protected if they're there. Water is a limiting factor. If it's non-irrigated, established should be tough. So we want to save those established forages. If we irrigate, we can increase our productivity. In the flatwoods, we're going to see a lot of palmettos, gallbladders, slash pines. Kind of reading through here, you may have some organic material, some finer particles increasing your CEC. It often contains a hard pan. The water doesn't get through anywhere between 18 to 36 inches. That can be a problem if excessive amount of rain, because drainage can be a limiting factor. So we need to be careful. We need to choose forages that do okay if they get a little bit wet. And we call it in the forage work, call having wet feet, because the roots can be wet. Why is this important? Horses are going to destroy a pasture. They can destroy it. I'm not saying they always do, but if you don't manage, horses will pull forage material up. Cattle can help build a pasture, and goats will help improve a pasture. So basically what we're trying to say with this slide is all of these livestock species must be managed. So good management is going to hopefully increase the productivity of your livestock operation. The density of the livestock. We look at horses, they can be the most destructive because, again, they're typically supplemented, but as they graze, they can constantly graze. They're selective. If you look at cows, they accumulate and they ruminate. So density, when we look at livestock species, most grazing livestock requires 2.5 to 3% of their body weight daily. If we look at a 1,000-pound cow, we expect about 25 pounds of dry matter of forage material a day, whether that's coming from the hay or coming from their pastures. But at any rate, let's continue to look at this. What could change the yield of your pasture? The sunlight, of course. Long day length versus short day length. Soil fertility, absolutely. Is it where it needs to be? The moisture, do you have a lot of moisture, no moisture? We're planting some cool season forages right now, and we're looking at when is it raining? What is the temperature? What's the day length? Do we have a weed pressure issue? One of the things I try to remind people is whenever you fertilize, if you have a bunch of weeds will take up fertilizer just as well as grass, and so we need to be careful with that. What kind of insect damage is out there? What is our grazing efficiency? Are we utilizing the pasture the way it should? So we need to remember that we have a number of management factors that go into affecting the amount of yield that we get from our pastures. Now, when we prepare our cool season forages, I'm going to go through a few slides here and just kind of discuss a general overview. Feel free to give me a call or your county agent a call. I'm sure they'll go through it in more detail. But we want to determine what you want to plant and get seed. I made a determination of what I was going to plant. I drove to, I identified where I could find my seed. That could be a limiting factor. Sometimes it's hard to find the variety you're looking for. But I found what I wanted. I went to the farm and ranch store. I purchased my seed. I've got it on hand. I'm ready to plant. And when I go out there, that's not going to be an issue. It's there. I know the site. We've prepared the site. We've checked the soils. We checked the soils. We know we are within 2/10 of where we want to be on our soil pH, so we're happy with that. We did not have to add any lime this year. Select your site. And here I've got two different photographs. On the left, you can see an area that has been overgrazed. It's impacted. The right doesn't look that much better, but it's a little bit better. Select your site. Know what you need to do. If you're going to go in, you're going to disc it. If you're going to rototill it, you want to make sure you have that forage material either mowed down or grazed down so that whenever you plant, you can get the best chance for production. I will say on the side on the left, after we planted this, we did not have this particular year a great year of cool season forages, but the following year, whenever the Bahia grass came back, it was incredibly good standard Bahia grass, and so we did see some subsequent effects on the Bahia grass from our cool season forage project. If you need lime, add lime. Lime is one of the cheapest nutrients you can purchase. You may see it and say, well, golly, my soil test says I need 2 tons of lime per acre. Yes, but Compared to nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, it's definitely cheaper, and you need to get your soils adjusted. When you add the lime, if you need the lime, it may take anywhere from 3 to 6 to 9 months for that lime to really bring your pH up. So the sooner you take a soil sample, the sooner you adjust it if it's needed, the better off you're going to be whenever you go to plant. So when we talk about cool season forages, we usually talk about January, February, March. Man, we need to do this next year. Go ahead and soil sample so you'll know. Get that lime out there so that in October, November, you can know that you're in much better shape. There's another example of applying lime using a buggy. Prepare the planting area, mow it. If you're going to burn it, or you're going to use paraquat, you can use glyphosate. This is an herbicide burn. There's different ways to do that. Are you going to disc it? Make sure that you're ready to go before you plant. Don't go out and try to do all this the same day you're planting. Give yourself some time to prepare that bed and be ready to go. Check your planting equipment for issues. You need to calibrate your equipment. Don't just assume it's right. Double check it. Make sure you're not going to go out and spread your seed, broadcast your seed using a spreader, or drill it, or however you plan to apply it, and get halfway through and be out of the seed, the amount of seed you planted for the whole project. So you do want to make sure you check that. Here's an example of how we burn down a section using some paraquat, using a buggy, and a relatively inexpensive boom. But a nice example of how it can be done. This particular buggy, I went ahead and took some more pictures just to show folks, because I get people this question a lot. I think it might have been in the $400 or $600 range. It was not that expensive compared to buying a brand new tractor, for example, or it wasn't in the $1,000 range. It's got a spray nozzle that you can spray by hand for spot spraying. You can do a boom. Fairly easy tool to utilize. Here's another example of our soil prep where we're disking and getting the ground ready. We're loosening it up. We're going to try to make sure our seed bed is ready to go. Here on the left, you can see we rototilled, and on the right, it's just compacted, hard ground. The side on the right certainly is going to have a harder, more difficult time than our side on the left, in my opinion, in this situation. This particular farm that we were working on, the drainage, it was not it didn't hold the water, but it wasn't sandhill soil either. So whenever we drove our tractor through the area that we had prepared, we didn't sink. I've been in some situations even recently where we went and we planted, and our ruts are just basically canals now because they're so full of water. But that wasn't the case in this particular farm. Calibrate your equipment. Here's an example. It's not a difficult process. We're happy to come out and help you do that. Make sure you're getting the right amount of volume coming out of each of the tubes that you expect, so that you plan accordingly. Here's another example. Dr. Marcelo Wallau, he's our forage management specialist over in Gainesville. Spends a lot of time working with us, showing us how to utilize the equipment, how to calibrate the equipment, and give us that firsthand knowledge that we need to work with our growers. Evaluate the rainfall and the temperature. They're called cool season forages for a reason, not hot season or warm season. They're cool. We want to add 30 pounds of nitrogen. I have here before planting, maybe more appropriate once it pops up. Give it some time to a couple of weeks after it plants. I need to adjust this slide. Sorry about that. Plant approximately 3 to 4 weeks later, add 50 pounds of nitrogen per acre. Here's an example of just broadcasting by hand. Here's a no-till drill. You can see the lines. It's basically going to allow us not to destroy the pasture, so we can come back in the spring months with our perennial pastures. Another picture of the no-till drill, worked out really well using this. Here's a cultipacker. One of the things that research has shown us and told us is whenever you plant some of our cool season forages, especially our ryegrasses, you want to come back with a roller of some sort, something that can push that ryegrass and get a nice firm contact with the soil so they can grow. This is just a relatively inexpensive tool that does a fantastic job increasing production. Fertilizers. Let's say you want to use a fertilizer and it has a breakdown of 19-5-19, and you want to put at least 60 pounds of nitrogen per acre. And I'm just throwing these numbers out. It's just a math problem. You can change this however you want. If you want to put 30 pounds, or if you get a 16-04, whatever. But just so we can use this as a little example, we talk about fertilizer. Now, I run into this a lot when I talk to people about cool season forages. because it can be misleading or just misunderstood. But when we see that number on the fertilizer bag that says 19,519, you have to remember it's a percentage. 19% nitrogen, 5% phosphorus, 19% potassium or potash. It's the same stuff, different wording and how we go with them. So if we said, all right, well, 1 ton of fertilizer has how much nitrogen? So you take 2,000 pounds and you multiply it times 19% or 0.19, you're going to get 380 pounds of nitrogen. You're going to get 100 pounds of phosphorus and 380 pounds of potassium. That's going to give you a, let me just double check this with my math here. Don't want to be wrong on this. 2,000 times, yeah, that's right, 19%. So 1 ton will cover 6.3 acres. We say 380 pounds. We need 60 pounds of nitrogen. So we take 380 divided by 60. That's going to cover 6.33 acres. So it gives you an idea of how much material you're going to need to cover to get that. Let me rephrase that. How many acres you'd be able to cover using 1 ton of this particular product. And you can do it a number of different ways, but just remember that 19,519 is a percentage, and that's what those numbers are used for. Soil fertilization regulations and recommendations. You always have the right to under-fertilize your pastures, but not all grasses will tolerate a hungry stomach. You do not have the right to over-fertilize your pasture. We do have our UF-IFAS guidelines for standard fertilizer recommendations for agronomic crops. It does go in through that and discuss that, so I encourage you to read through that and familiarize yourself before you fertilize. Here's just some pictures I've got that of a project that we fertilized. We prepared this soil bed. Everything was working out well. We had, if you look across the field from where we're standing, we take the photograph all the way to this house in the back, and perpendicular, we have different varieties of forage crop as you go across. The first 7 or 8 are ryegrasses, so they don't look a lot different when you look from a distance. But further down, we get into some triticales and some rye. But what we wanted to show here is with this particular farmer, he was going to come in and he was going to put 30 pounds of nitrogen a couple of weeks after planting, and then come back with 50 pounds of nitrogen. Well, it turns out it got delayed for a number of reasons. He did not get his 30 pounds of nitrogen out there, delayed. And so when we finally were able to approach this, I said, look, let's take our 30 pounds of nitrogen per acre. We're going to shorten this. We're going to cut it in half. We're going to put 60 pounds of nitrogen and just fertilize the middle strip here. So if you look on the left where we have the yellowing and the right, we have the dark green. That's one application of 60 pounds of nitrogen, what the nitrogen can do for your forage operation. It's been great if we had a little bit more rain in this situation, but in this particular demonstration, this is what we saw. Here's another picture of the same farm. You can see our yellow lines throughout our dark green here. This is where our fertilizer missed. We were using a hand spreader. It was wasn't as good as maybe our broadcast spreader might have been had we been on the tractor. Here's the right side, same deal, just under fertilized. And then over here on the far right, past our flagging, you'll see an area that was still hard pan. I mean, it's just hard, compacted soil. So certainly we, using this demonstration, can fertilize some cool season forages, regardless of the variety here, or just plant cool season forages, don't fertilize it or don't do anything at all. Which one of these would you want on your farm? We need to remember to look at our integrated pest management, look at diseases and insect pests. Some of these are on some of our perennial grasses, like Bermuda grass or Bahia grass, but Bipolaris helminthisporum is something we'll see in our Bermuda grasses. You can get rust, leaf decline, look at mole crickets as a insect issue, some different things that you're going to want to familiarize yourself on as you approach your full season forages. Here's an example. If you look at the left photograph, we've got a dark green line going straight down, and then on the right side, we see some goldish color, and it goes straight down. Initially, whenever I approached this, I thought, man, something is wrong. It looks like it's just wrong on the right side. And as I got to talking to the grower, it turns out cocoa oats on the left, and he had planted horizon oats on the right. I don't remember which variety, but the horizon oats were susceptible to crown rust. And turns out he was running into a little bit of an issue here. The photograph on the right-hand side here is the same pasture. I asked him, what happened? How did he resolve this problem? He fertilized his entire field the same. He got some excellent, the rainfall fell at the right time. Everything was working out really well, and his forages were able to overcome the rust issue. But had he been grazing this particular pasture, there would have been less forage material there for the animals to take care of. So crown rust can be an issue if you aren't familiar with that. So some folks look for crown rust resistant oats. Some folks may not have nearly the problem as others on it. But when we talk about integrated pest management, this is just an example of what you might run into. And crown rust, this is picture is not the best, but it does look like a scab. Like you could almost pick that thing off the forage material. It's just a yellowing. I got some examples of some different oats that we planted. These were all planted at the same farm in triplicates and in 3 different replicates. Here's our Horizon 201 oat. You go through Florida, it's 0567. This now is called Legend 567. This is a crown rust resistant oat. We demonstrated this for several years in a row and had some fantastic forage volume coming out of it. If you have a smaller operation, I use this photograph a lot because I think this client did a fantastic job in demonstrating what could be done. She had about a 3-acre parcel. Her house, driveway, and everything in the front. You go to the back, in the backyard, a swimming pool. In the back of that, she had a fence that basically went into the pasture area. And then you'll see this back fence here that goes up to her her stall and her barn area. This green area that I've taken a photograph of, she planted that in ryegrass. She had gone to a farm and ranch store and she bought a sprinkler that has a 50-foot radius. She could reach both sides of this fence. She moved that sprinkler twice during the week, and she could water the entire paddock. She was able to grow some fantastic ryegrass during this growing season. She has her sacrifice area here next to the barn, and she had 2 pastures in the back, one for each of her horses. She put her horses up at night. During the day, they would graze in her normal paddocks. And then she would introduce them into the ryegrass to give them a nice grazing opportunity during the cool season months. Oops. I hope we've been able to cover some material that's useful for your operation and your efforts. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. My email is timwilson@ufl.edu. That's timwilson@ufl.edu. And we're happy to address any of your questions that you might have. Feel free to reach out to me at any time. And if you don't reach out to me, you still have questions, feel free to reach out to your local county agent, because that's what we're here for, and we're happy to address any of your questions. But with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Our next presenter is Dr. Wendy Mussolini. As I mentioned earlier, she's our multi-county agent from Putnam and Flagler counties. She has a strong interest in this subject area and a background that can certainly contribute a lot to our program tonight. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Mussolini.
Thank you, Tim. I really appreciated that presentation. It was very thorough and just touched on a lot of practical things that are really, really helpful for producers, and I very much appreciate that. Hopefully I can fill in some details on the economic side of things. I am certainly, do you see my screen, Tim? Give me a thumbs up on that. Okay, great. If I move down, I don't know how to. I am in the presentation, so I'm not really sure. Tim, can you tell me how to advance? Okay, never mind. That looks like I can advance using the arrows. Okay, great. So as I said, this is a great opportunity for me to share some things that I am just very much learning in an elementary level. I really enjoy the economic side of things because I think we all want to, it all comes down to, is it worth it? Is it really worth it? Is it going to pay off in the end? How can we get it cheaper? What's the most economical route without, sacrificing opportunities for pregnancy with the livestock? Obviously, we want to, because then if we sacrifice a pregnancy, then of course, then we lose money. And so we want to keep the nutrition high, and it all comes down to, managing this as a business. And so the economics are very much a part of this. Thanks to Chris Pravat, I have some interesting slides about economics, and he kind of briefed me on this. He is absolutely our economic expert when it comes to livestock. So if you have difficult questions, I definitely say email Chris. Chris Pravat. I can't remember where he's based. Isn't he down in Ona, Tim, or somewhere down South Florida? I don't remember where he's exactly out of, the research farm down in Ona, I think. But anyway, I'm going to proceed with some things that hopefully you will find interesting. First of all, cool season annual forages, they do provide nutrition that exceeds requirements for fall and winter calving herds during their most critical time. So when we think about, when a cow is going to give birth, it's going to be in those winter months when our forage is the lowest and lowest availability here in Florida, just because we don't have the rain, we don't have as much sunshine. Most of our grass is brown, and our typical Bahayas and Bermudas, unless you get into some jigs, because that stuff stays green all year round. I'm impressed with that stuff down in Flagler County. But for the most part, the cool season annual forages really provide an opportunity to keep our livestock grazing through those winter months where their nutritional needs are very high. And let's just take a quick look. I know this is kind of an intimidating, lots of numbers slide, but let's take a quick look at this. This is, I sent these ryegrasses off to Dairy One last year. We did a variety trial in Flagler County, and I'm not going to really, so it's just a demonstration trial. We did collect some data on tons per acre and that kind of thing. And we looked at nutrition of these different ryegrasses. There were 3 different varieties. Now, one thing I do want to say is they were all tetraploids. I'm not talking about just the little diploid, the tiny seeds. They were all tetraploids. And if you look at these 3, again, I'm not here to promote variety or not promote a variety, and I didn't do all the statistics involved and triplicate analysis and statistical differences. So again, I'm not going to disclose which ryegrass is which. But what the point of this is if you look at number 1 versus number 2 versus number 3, and look at these crude protein contents. This is percent on a dry matter basis, okay, 19% versus 29% versus 33%. Now, they're all very high, okay? When we talk about crude protein, I mean, that's the first thing, is that they all exceed really the nutritional value of what a cow typically needs. Dr. Hersom has a great EDIS pub that I think it's called Basic Nutrient Requirements for Beef Cows. And in that document, he really talks a lot about crude protein and the many factors that go into how do you know how much protein your cow needs. And it changes, okay? It changes based on the age of the cow, based on the level of production and their stage of production, like how soon, how long has it been since they calved, what is their level of milk production, that kind of thing. And so he has a table at the end of this EDIS pub, and it's a really helpful table. And it just gives you a kind of a good idea of what your crude protein requirements are. For example, I got this strictly from that document by Dr. Hersom. An 1,000-pound cow that gave birth within, say, the last 3 months, 1 month, 2 month, or 3 month, basically needs 9% crude protein to produce 10 pounds of peak milk. Now, if you're looking at that same 1,000-pound cow at the same time frame, around 1 to 3 months after calving, and you needing 20 pounds per milk, then you need to bump up that crude protein to roughly, I think the tables showed, about 11%. So that kind of gives us some reference point of what this crude protein means. So 19%, 29%, and 33%. Now we don't really see, okay, well, so what? Which ryegrass I pick? I mean, before we kind of went through that little exercise, 19% seems a lot lower than 33%. Well, it is lower. But again, if we're still meeting the requirements of our cow at its most needy time, 1 to 3 months after calving is going to be its most needy time for the protein intake, all of these ryegrasses are going to provide for the cow the nutrition that it needs. The other big one that everyone looks at for livestock is, again, energy. So it's total digestible nutrients. This is on a percent basis. Here you see 71, 71, 72. Those numbers are much closer for the ryegrasses, for these three that we evaluated. And basically when you go back to this basic nutrient requirement document, you see that anything over 59 is considered high quality feed. So those things are met. But did want to just discuss that a little bit, because I think whatever you're feeding, it's always a great idea. I think this if you do I went ahead and had all the micronutrients evaluated and everything in this analysis, but maybe this was a $32 cost for me to get this. If you only want protein and TDN, you're going to get that for roughly $15, So I think we have some forage labs that do it here on UF, or again, you could send it off to Dairy One or another forage lab that I think, I don't know if Waters does forage, but there's plenty of places that you can get that evaluated. That way you know exactly the nutrition that's going into your cows. Okay, now, how much does it cost? How much is it going to cost me? Because that's the big question mark. So it's going to be based on several factors. And one thing I kind of forgot to mention is the cool season forages. Let me go back to this one slide. They are going to have higher crude protein concentrations than our typical annuals. The Bahia grass falls around 9 to 12, kind of a range between 9 to 12% crude protein, and Bermuda grass is around maybe 10 to 14%, and their TDNs are a bit lower. So for a Bahia, you're going to have 50 to 56, and the Bermuda 55 to 60. And I'm getting those numbers from Dr. Hancock's forage systems for stocker cattle document. He's out of Georgia. So again, reference point. So now let's get into the real question. I'm really kind of making you anticipate, how much is this going to cost me to actually do it? Okay, well, let's look at what are the things that are involved? What do we have to invest in? Here are the big items: are going to be seed, are going to be fertilizer, and then your planting machinery. What Tim showed some great pictures of the no-till drills and that type of thing. If you have access to one of those for free, like Extension might, and you want to partner with Extension and do an extension project that may be free for you, or if you have to purchase that, or if you have to sub that out. There are folks in our area that do that for folks, and they charge a rate. I don't know what their rate is, but if you are looking to get a no-till drill, and it's not something that most people own, right? Because you do it once a year and it's just a big piece of equipment. This is where sharing with your neighbors comes in handy. You really have a lot of maybe other livestock producers in the area, and you guys partner together and you share equipment, and that is beneficial in this occasion. And I think there's this group of those that do this in Flagler County. Some of the other Less expensive items might be your lime, actually applying a fertilizer, controlling your weeds, soil test. Gosh, I think that's I think it's $10 now sample at UF. If you only want the pH and lime recommendation, I think it's only $3. But if you want your whole nutrient recommendation, you pay, and there's some micros that come in there too. So I think it's $10. So I consider those small costs compared to seed and fertilizer and actually planting the machines. So fertilizer is a big deal if you're going to buy it by the bag. Let's talk about that for a second, because if you're only going to plant a couple acres, you're not going to buy a ton of fertilizer or 2 tons or 10 tons or whatever you need to buy to be hauled to your house in bulk. You're going to buy it by the bag. And the problem with buying fertilizer by the bag is you pay a lot of money when you buy it by the bag. I have a great example here. I was just on the phone with Diamond R. Okay. And so if I wanted to buy a bag of just nitrogen in the form of like whether it was potassium nitrate, I think it was potassium nitrate, but it's a 2100 blend. Okay. So there's no phosphorus in that, no potassium in that. This is nitrogen only, 21% nitrogen. Tim did a great job kind of explaining what those numbers mean. I think he did 15 and 9, 15, or I think it was his number breakdown, but this is a 21-0-0. That bag, that 50-pound bag of fertilizer is going to run you today $15.78. Okay. So let's break that down by the acre, and let's break it down by the rate, because Tim also showed you a picture that had one side of the field had a lot less nitrogen and one side of the picture had a lot more nitrogen. But let's look at the cost of those different sides of the field, okay? Because if we're going to put 31 pounds of nitrogen out and we're using that 2100, it's going to be $15.78 times 3. That's going to be $47 per acre, right? Because we have to do 21% of 150 pounds. 0.21 times 150. That's our 31 pounds or 32 pounds per acre rate. So for a 32 pound per acre rate of nitrogen, that's going to cost us $47 an acre. Now, if we want to add that, let's double that, right? Let's put a 63 pounds of nitrogen per acre out. We're going to have to put 6 bags out. That's $15 times $15 times 6. That's $95 an acre. So that's a big difference. Now, that's when we're looking at small acreage, and that's where we get expensive, because if we had 20 acres, it'd be totally different, because we could buy a ton of fertilizer and pay 60 cents a pound rather than, when we are paying $15.78 per pound divided by 50. Yeah, 31 cents a pound per fertilizer. So we have to pay a lot less. We have to get it in bulk and pay a lot less for the fertilizer to not be an economic challenge. Okay, let's look at seed prices, because I also called around some of our local folks. I'm not going to say one is better than the other, but I did call around and just compare some prices and saw what people have in stock. And this year. The phone call was made sometime late October, early November of 2020 to see what these prices were at these locations and which varieties you could actually get, because sometimes seed is hard to find. If you don't get your seed real early and up front, it's hard to find. So Diamond R had some jumbo and some Attain at $27 for the ryegrass for a 50-pound bag. Like Butler had some Tam Tebow for $38.50, some Big Boss for $26.50, and then Mayo fertilizer over in Lake City had a little bit more of a kind of a spread of varieties that you could choose from. They had some of the early Floyd, the Frost Proof, Big Boss Tea Tambo, and the Jumbo. So we had a little bit more choices there. If you talk to Dr. Blunt, she did an IST earlier in October, and she named a lot of different ryegrasses, right? There are plenty of different varieties out there. Andes, Attain, Big Boss, Credence, Diamond Tea, Early Floyd, Flying A, Freya, Frostproof, Lone Star, Marshall, Maximus, Nelson, Prime, Passerelle Plus, Tam Tebow, Tetrastar, Winter Hawk. And again, she said many, many more were on the market. Cereal Rise. Those might be a little harder to get hold of. Mayo Fertilizer, again, looks like they have a better selection than the other two. The Renz Bruzy is pretty common, so that you're going to find that pretty much anywhere you go. $20 bag, a little less expensive at Mayo. And you have a better choice over Mayo. The ones that Dr. Blunt, she recommended the early Florida 401 for an early cereal rye, and then the mid-season, maybe the Kelly Grazer 3, Renza Bruzy for a little bit mid-maturing, and then the late maturing would be Elbon, Maton, and Bates RS4. Wheat is another choice. So you're going to pay a little less for wheat, $13, $16, $15 a pound for a 50-pound bag. Most wheats are bred as grain types. Some of the recommendations that she came with were the AGS 2024, the AGS Graysall, Dynagro Plantation, and Pioneer 26R10. It doesn't look like those that she kind of recommended are available at any of these 3 locations, but this is what you have to choose from. Oats, a lot more oats. Well, kind of like ryegrass. Some of the recommendations she had, Dr. Blunt had, was the Legend 567, which looks like it's available at Mayo. Horizon 270, Horizon 306, the Horizon 720, the Ram LA 99016 was a recommendation, which I don't know if that's the same one that Mayo told me was their Ram. Cougar 227 is pretty common. I think it's maybe a little less performing than some of the others. Clover is very expensive. Okay, clover, you don't have to use as much clover. The seeding rate is typically a lot less than these other annuals. But the benefit of the clover is you can use less fertilizer because it's a nitrogen fixer. It's it has the nodules in the roots, and it contains that bacteria that actually fixes the nitrogen from the atmosphere and brings it into the soil. It's a legume, and it's just a beautiful concept there. You're going to pay a little bit more for that, but it is very nutritious, very high in crude protein and total digestible nutrients. So there was a little bit out there. Found a white clover at Diamond R and a crimson clover at Lake Butler. They did not tell me which varieties they had. There are other white clover varieties out there. Some of the recommended ones would be the Ocoee, Osceola, Louisiana, S1, Regal Grays, Regal Ladino, and Durana. Some of the red clovers, Southern Belle, Barduro, Red Ace, and a couple of the recommended crimson clovers are the Dixie and the AU Robin. They might be hard to find, but you can keep looking if you are persistent. I think you might be able to track some down, but again, they are going to just be a little bit more expensive. So now that you have the prices for the seed, we've talked about prices for fertilizer. You basically have to figure out what your equipment costs are going to be. And then you figure out, okay, well, what is my cost of forage production per acre? And if it's $150 per acre, let's just say I don't know if that's low or high. Again, there are a lot of variables that depend on whether that's a low number or high number. But typically, the way we would figure this would be we have to know kind of all of these these inputs. Okay, so how many acres, first of all, are we going to plant in a cool season forage? If it's going to cost us $150, do we have $3,000 to cover 20 acres? Okay, no, we don't. We have 1,500. Okay, well then we better cut it back to 10 acres. Okay, so now stocking rates, oftentimes one beef cow per acre. So that's going to be 20 cows. And the number of grazing days, let's go ahead and say 3 months, December, January, February, would be roughly 90 plus another 10 days, 100 days. Okay, so if we want to know the total cost to feed in dollars per head per day, we have to take that $150 per acre and divide it by, well, we know the acre, it's one cow per acre. So that's kind of a 1-to-1 ratio. So that doesn't affect our economic calculation. That kind of cancels things out. So then we have to figure out, okay, per day, 150 divided by 100 is $1.50. So it basically is $1.50 per head per day to feed when you are looking at $150 price per acre. Now this is a table that has a lot of numbers in it. Okay, and I can break these down for you. First of all, I don't know if you can see my arrow. First of all, let's look. This is the number we just talked about, the cost per acre to actually produce an annual forage. This is at the low end, $150 per acre. What if it runs you all the way to $300 per acre? Well, I mean, if it does, we have to, this is a sliding scale. We have to figure out how everything else falls out, and we have to compare it to what our feed cost is if we have to go buy feed at the store or other options for feed. So my throat's getting sore. So first of all, let's look at this first column, forage production. This changes depending on, a Bahia grass, Bermuda grass, or your cool season annual. This is basically how much biomass are you actually producing? How thick is that stand? How many pounds per acre of biomass are you actually producing? And that can vary anywhere from 3,000 to 10,000. And this is on a dry matter basis. DM means dry matter. And this is pounds per acre. And I were just talking today about having that neat little gadget where I know Mark Warren used to use it. He was saying another agent he knew used it, and mine is actually a square, and I think it's 3 feet. It's exactly represents a certain percentage of an acre, 1,000th of an acre. And so you throw this ring or the square over your biomass. You cut all of the grass down to grazing. Okay, say it's been grazed, it gets to about 3 inches. So if it's 9 inches and you cut it down to 3 inches, you take all that biomass, you weigh it, and then you dry it in an oven and make sure how much moisture is in it. And you can actually calculate how many pounds per acre your biomass is producing. Okay, and so once you get that number, you know how much forage production you have. But is that how much forage utilization you're going to have? Probably not. This table assumes, I think this is something Chris put out together, forage utilization was assumed to be 50% of the forage production. So like he was saying, well, they start trampling in an area, or they might use the bathroom in an area, and okay, so there's cow patties there, they're not going to eat that part, or just gets too wet or low, or just because you have the production doesn't mean it's going to be utilized by the herd. So then he went ahead and cut that. So even if you have the biomass of 7,000 pounds per acre dry matter, your cows are only utilizing half of that. So we really have to look at this number, 3,500. So basically, we have to start looking at what is our cost for buying material. So is it going to cost us $200 per dry matter ton that's consumed? We have to figure out how much we're paying per dry ton. You get that bale of hay, need to figure out, okay, that maybe that bale weighs 1,000 pounds, but dry weight, if it's how much moisture is in that hay, is it wet, is it dry? You have to figure out how much dry hay, and then figure out how many dollars is that per dry ton. Okay, remember there's 2,000 pounds in a ton, so you've got to convert that. But this is, once you understand what your feed cost is, then you come back to look at this and say, okay, well, if I can get my cool season forage production cost down to $200 per acre, and I can get my biomass production up to about 6,000 pounds per acre on a dry matter basis, let's say that gives me 3,000, then I'm right here at $133 per dry ton consumed. Is that more or less than the feed I'm purchasing, whether that's grain, whether that's hay, alfalfa hay, whatever you're buying through the winter to supplement? And that's where this number, that's where you decide. And so anything under $200, you can be anywhere here, and you probably are going to outweigh the purchase cost. Now, if you start getting up here around $333 and those are your production costs, and you're only producing this much forage, and then it's not making sense. Okay, your area is too small. You're not growing what you need to grow. It's not making sense. So, but if we're staying below that $200 per dry ton consumed, then it really can be a beneficial economic choice. Now, I have a little quick story to end on, and Tim was with me on this tour. We toured the eggplant facility, and there is a new eggplant processing facility in Putnam County, and they're processing roughly 120,000 pounds of fresh eggplant per week. It's a lot of eggplant. And I said, okay, wow, that's a lot of eggplant. But at the front of their processing line, they have all the labor, and they're peeling, throwing all these peels in the waste bin, and they're cutting off the tops, because basically what they're doing is taking the flesh of the eggplant, throwing it through a batter, flash frying it, flash freezing it, putting it into a bag, sending it off to an Italian restaurant in New York, probably. Anyway, so I'm looking at all this excess, the peels and the tops, and I'm saying, and then they're frying some of the product, and they're like, oh, this didn't come out perfect, we're going to throw that away. So I go into their waste room where they collect in their waste, and it's filled to the brim. It's filled to the roof with all of these eggplant. And so, what do you do with all this organic matter? Oh no, please don't tell me you throw it in a landfill. Like, that is one of my biggest pet peeves, like organic matter going to a landfill, because of course it's just going to make methane, and we're not going to collect it and be energy efficient with it. And okay, I'll go into a bunny trail there. But no. Organics cannot go to a landfill. First of all, you're going to utilize all the space that really, true waste needs to go into. This is not waste. This is an organic co-product that is so valuable. And we sent those peels off to Dairy One, and they came back 17% on a dry matter basis, crude protein, with a TDN around, gosh, I think it was around, have to check back, but it was in the 70, I think around 70 or something like that. Definitely upper 60s, far above 57. And I'm looking at this going, this is beautiful. And guess what number we have on this? Guess what? That goes from $160 to $0 per dry matter ton consumed. Okay. So basically, not exactly zero, but the plant is basically saying, we will give it to you, cowboy. Take it and feed your cows. And so those are options. Okay, not everyone is going to have a fantastic eggplant processing facility in their backyard. We happen to in Putnam County. That's very exciting now. But everyone has a brewery. Just about everybody has a brewery. They're becoming very, very common throughout Florida. There are microbreweries everywhere. And the brewer's grains, very similar Okay, a little more water that you're carrying. The eggplant was only 50-50, right? 50% total solids or 50% dry matter and 50% water. So again, we weren't hauling a lot of water. With the wet distiller's grains, you're going to be hauling a little bit more water. But again, when you look at the TDN and the protein was up around 33% on a dry matter basis for that wet distiller's grains that we looked at coming out of Azalea City here in Putnam County. So, and what's the big price tag on that? $0 per dry matter because it's given to you. And now you do have to consider the cost of hauling. And of course, that's going to vary based on how far are you hauling it, what are you hauling it in, what's the gas, how much are we paying for a gallon of gas today versus tomorrow. And the time that it's going to take to transport and pick up the materials. But again, I think we have to be really, really thoughtful, again, as we move forward in understanding how to become more efficient, cost efficient wise. I think it's very important that we look at all these co-products and that we can get these numbers even a lot lower. So I think cool season forages are a wonderful way to do that, but let's continue to be creative in our strategies here. So one other slide, this is my last slide, benefits of forage mixtures. I think when you mix forages together rather than just picking one single variety of one single type of forage, you really can mix them. One example would be, let's put a 40% rye blend, 40% oats and 20% ryegrass to extend that grazing opportunity, right? It's going to come up faster. It's going to last longer. Going to have a little bit of protection from the disease. If one particular variety of one type gets something, it doesn't mean everything gets affected. Provides a little bit more of a balance in the diet of the livestock. The soil root zones change depending on what stage of growth that forage is in. And so moisture is used efficiently. The nutrients are used efficiently because there's all these different root zones. And the germination rates, right? I mean, sometimes you get a bad bag of seed. And if you got all your eggs in one bag of seed and it doesn't germinate, it's a problem. So mix it up. Diversifying is always a good idea. So that's what I got for you today. I hope that was helpful. Hope it just started getting you thinking. No, it didn't give you all your answers, but hopefully started getting you thinking in the right direction. Please email me any questions you might have. And I really appreciate you, Tim, for letting me join you on this exciting lecture series.
All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Mussolini. We appreciate your presentation and provided a lot of insight that I know many of our folks will be looking for. And if you guys have any questions, feel free to email your local county agent or reach out to myself or Dr. Mussolini. We're certainly happy to help you as much as we can. And if there's something that we're not familiar with or unable to address, we can reach out to our specialists and some other experts at the University of Florida. But with that, we'll close for tonight. Thank you for participating in our program. I hope you'll look forward to our next installment of the Living on a Few Acres series, our virtual series. It's held the third Thursday of each month, and we try and change the topics up to address different needs in our community. So thank you for participating, and I hope you guys take care. Thank you.
Thank you.